let's talk about our federal stuff. So, like I mentioned, we had an election. So there's two chambers in, well, both the state and the federal. So we have our House of Representatives and our Senate. So the House of Representatives has 435 total seats. After the election and where it currently stands as of today, we have 219 Republicans, 215 Democrats, and then there's one vacant seat. That vacancy is due to Representative Gates. No longer, he stepped back after all the drama there. I will not get into the weeds there. Just Google it if you have somehow missed that news as well. So there will be an election to fill that vacant seat that he stepped down from. So as you can see, the Republicans hold a narrow majority there, so it's really limiting room for any inside of the party, any kind of discontent. They really need to stick together to get things passed. Because of that close margin, we're going to see that there's really going to be a need for bipartisan support. In a perfect world, everything would be bipartisan. I talk about this all the time throughout my work, is that in a perfect world, we could find bipartisan support on everything. That means that there's Democrats and Republicans supporting an initiative. But of course, with the political climate right now, that's just not where we're at as a society, unfortunately. We did already kind of see some of this discontent a little bit within the Republican Party when they were voting for Speaker. Um, Ultimately, it did go through during the first vote, so it wasn't much of a protest, but it is going to be something to keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting to see how that vacant seat plays out. And similar to that, we have the Senate. So there's 100 senators in the US Senate, two from every state. The current makeup, again, as of today, is 52 Republicans, 45 Democrats. So the Republicans have a bit more of a margin in the Senate in terms of like the size of the Senate. And then there's two independents, as well as another vacant seat. That vacant seat is where Senator Vance, JD Vance was, but as we know, he will be stepping into the vice president role as of Monday. So those two independents generally caucus with the Democrats. So what that means is they usually work with the Democrats, but they can go either way. Really, anyone can go either way, right? We see Democrats siding with Republicans and vice versa. And then, of course, there's going to be a midterm election next year that will really shape what this chamber looks like. I can't stress enough, I'll probably say it a few more times throughout this presentation. Really, every year is an election year. There's always going to be local initiatives, there's always going to be council, there's going to be proposals, millages. So don't get so caught up in the federal level stuff. I know that's the stuff we see online. I know that's the stuff that we see on the big news networks. It's probably the stuff we're talking about in our schools. But the local and state level, especially our local level, those county commissions that like control the money for the counties, like that local level is so important. So even though I say there's a, a midterm election next year coming up, that doesn't discount 2025 as an election year. So please check with your local municipalities, and check what's going on. You'll hear me on that soapbox quite a bit. So federal level priorities as social workers. I want to emphasize that this list came directly from our national office. So the National Association of Social Workers has their own like national office that we all kind of report to. So I don't think anything on here is necessarily surprising. However, for me personally, there's a couple of things I was surprised to see not on this list. So student loan relief, social work safety, making sure we're protected in the field, reimbursement rates, especially for our clinical social workers, licensure portability, that continues to be a discussion, especially with the interstate compact for those who are familiar with it. States that are signing on to the compact are basically agreeing to allow that license to be reciprocated over state lines. Michigan has not signed on to the compact at this time. Fun fact, we recently learned that Governor Whitmer actually doesn't like interstate compacts too much. So something we're learning to work around, but there's without getting too far into the weeds, one of the concerns that we see with the licensing compact is that as it stands, it does require the ASWB exam to be a part of it, and that is something we are exploring moving away from. Of course, Medicare policy and improving access to mental health, those are always going to be conversations. We're never going to stop having those conversations. The child tax credit, voting rights, paid leave. We're seeing some paid leave discussions also at the state level. AI commission, that's something kind of new. We're entering this territory of AI is incorporated into our lives, and what does that mean for us? And then, of course, the taking action piece, making sure we're connected federally to the big agencies, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services. And then they're going to start up a federal policy scorecard so we can keep track and hold our legislators accountable. At the bottom there, I say, what other issues would you like to see on this list? So I don't know if anyone wants to throw in the chat or unmute themselves and mention some policy. There's a couple of big ones not on this list federally that I noticed right away, and I don't know if anybody shares my sentiment with something big that's missing, and we're already seeing some states roll out some harmful policies, but I'd be so curious to see if anyone wants to throw in the chat, unmute, and share what they feel like might be missing on this list. Let me open up the chat window while I see. That's exactly it. That is the one that I was really like startled. I'm seeing some folks coming in with, yep, LGBTQ, Department of Education changed at the federal level. That's a good one, right? We know the incoming administration has said some really, really strong statements about dismantling the Department of Education. And I half joking, half seriously say that, if they get rid of the Department of Education, then I'm definitely not paying my student loans back, that's for sure. But all jokes aside, that's a really serious issue if we're not going to have a Department of Education. Protections from undocumented folks, DEI, and DEI is kind of becoming a bad word with the, like diversity and equity and inclusion are suddenly bad things. Protections for undocumented folks. We're seeing that also happening a little bit at the state level. We'll be sure to talk about it. I'm really glad to see so much input from the chat. Thank you, everybody, because I could spend the next hour just talking about your suggestions and forgetting about the rest of my slides here. Trans rights, so just to get back, because I already derailed my train of thought, trans rights is exactly what I was thinking in terms of what's not on this federal list and something I do intend to respond with. They just asked us for our feedback today from the state chapters. And super concerning with states already rolling out bathroom bans, the sports, like things that I don't know if people actually care about or if it just makes like a really hot topic for certain people, right? Like as social workers, we obviously care about protecting communities, but painting our trans community as the villain is a very just I hate it and it's awful, but it's a really interesting tactic that we're starting to see. Um, and when I'm speaking with folks at Equality Michigan, for example, it really does feel like that, some parties, some folks are really trying to splinter the LGBTQ plus community and try to separate our trans community from the rest of that, group and splinter them off as the villain. So it's scary and it is something that's going to be something that we're going to continue talking about. Climate justice is another one. I'm so glad you brought that up, Megan. I think climate justice, like we're seeing it right in front of our faces. Well, I think we see it all the time, but probably a little extra right now with the fires. And to go right back there, the license non-portability is affecting disaster response and telehealth portability in particular to be super helpful for us to band together in crisis response. RJ bringing up the nonprofit killer bills. For those who may not have caught on to that, that is a bill that would target certain nonprofits that support more progressive issues and prohibit them from doing that kind of work. We just saw maybe a couple days ago, Elon Musk posted about, defunding Sierra Club. And that's a environmental justice nonprofit, just to kind of tie all these thoughts together that I'm seeing in the chat. So there's a lot of concerns in terms of this, what work, it's labeled progressive, but, as social workers, at least to me in particular, it doesn't feel progressive. It doesn't feel progressive to, want to talk about the climate. It doesn't feel because it's kind of like in our moral code and in our ethics, right? Like these ideas shouldn't be so scary and progressive. They are kind of just basic human rights, but how do we have those conversations at that bigger level? I couldn't agree more, and thank you everybody who threw these in the chat. We're gonna keep talking a little bit more about all those areas. So let's talk a little bit about the state. So again, we had an election, things kind of shifted at the election, and we're already seeing bills get introduced that are very competitive with each other. So I'm going to nerd out here a little bit because it's been kind of exciting already right out of the gate. I'm going to give everybody some context though. So for the first time in decades, Michigan had a what they were calling the Democratic trifecta. I am sure you heard that, right? So that means we had the state Senate, we had the state House, and then we have Governor Whitmer, who's a Democrat, right? So we thought that we were going to see Democrats push through a bunch of bills that maybe align a little bit more closely with social work values. We saw in 2023, they amended the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to include, gender expression, sexual orientation. We saw, conversion therapy get banned. We saw all these things. We saw gun control, like massive gun control, overhaul being passed. And then 2024 happened, and you're going to hear me say this again and again, but it was an election year. So we saw that party leadership and House leadership in particular, they weren't really voting on much. Nothing really happened in 2024. And I feel like that really had an impact on the election and who won and who didn't win, I should say. Let me check the chat here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, the DEI, I like the fact that those are like scary words now is really troubling to me. So with that, we have now seen our House has shifted to a Republican majority. And they have a six-person majority. So it's slim, but it's not it's enough. We've seen some new committees. So some new committees I saw was economic competitiveness, natural resources and tourism. So we're kind of seeing a little bit of the agenda going forward and what's that going to look like. Something that happened towards the end of last year is lame duck. If you don't know what lame duck is, what it is that like after an election happens, it's the period of time where an old legislature is kind of on its way out and the new one's on its way in. So sometimes we'll see a lot of action during lame duck when they're like, oh my goodness, I need to pass all these bills because they're not going to get to pass next term. Or like, I have a little bit more time and maybe I won't pass as much during lame duck. Lame duck here in Michigan was like extra lame. It was not great. We saw, they waited till the last second and they pulled like 24-hour days, which sounds really cool, right? I'm like, oh yeah, like my state house representative was on the floor like for 16 hours making stuff happen, but realistically, they could have been doing that all year long. And then they wouldn't have had to, pull that 16-hour, shift at the end there. Unfortunately, due to some kind of like inner party contention, I don't know how else to describe it. It took one House representative leaving for them to not have a majority anymore, and they had to stop voting. So a lot of bills unfortunately died on the floor in lame duck. So there's a lot of initiatives that should have passed. Our licensing bills, social work licensing bills were one of them that was on the floor and died on the floor, and it was very sad. Um, so that being said, it'll be interesting watching this new makeup of the state house. We are already having meetings with our state legislators, to let them know we're here, we exist, and we have things we want to talk about. The state Senate, they were not up for election this year, so we have 19 Democrats and 18 Republicans and one vacant seat. So you might be wondering, wait a minute, Dana, you just told me there wasn't an election. Why is there one vacant seat in our state Senate? And that is because Senator McDonald Rivet ran for Congress, House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., and she won her election. So there'll be a special election to fill her seat. So obviously you can see there, we have, there's a 19 Democrats, 18 Republicans. So that one vacant seat in the Senate is going to determine quite a bit in what's going to happen here. To talk more specifically about our priorities at the state, this is something I'm going to be plugging it a little later, but this is a conversation that you can absolutely, participate in. And I'm going to ask the same thing again here. So for our social work profession, one of our priorities is clearly going to be licensure reform. That's something that we're going to keep talking about. Michigan is really wonky with our licensure reform. We don't align with other states. We really want to get our licensing tiers more aligned with other states. We want to have another option that's not the ASWB exam, because the ASWB exam is harmful in my personal opinion. And if you haven't caught the 2023 data that we posted towards the end of the year, only about 36% of Michigan social work candidates passed the exam in 2023. So we really want to explore alternative ways to licensing, because we don't want to lose social workers, because there's so many qualified, wonderful social workers um, that folks can't keep because of how our structure is. And that also includes exploring extending the limited license renewal piece, because we know that that's another barrier as well, is, what can we do while we're sorting out the exam piece, and trying to find a way to extend the licensing renewals is another piece. Insurance clawback. So for our clinical folks, there's no time frame right now for insurance companies to take payments back from folks. They can do it in any time frame they want right now. There's no laws in Michigan protecting our mental health providers. So that is a piece of legislation we will be working on with not only our social workers, but we've teamed up with our Michigan mental health counselors. We also hope to bring the psychologists in on this legislation. So stay tuned. We're really excited to introduce that. And then increased pay. That's going to be an ongoing conversation. I'm sure everybody can agree with, social work wages in general, especially if we want to keep people in the field. Probably not a surprise. We're always going to talk about mental health access, and we're always going to talk about harm reduction efforts. We're seeing, more of that. We have a lot of social work representation in our state legislature. We have at least 2 representatives with social work degrees, and we have at least 2 senators with social work degrees. So we have folks that care, deeply about these issues. Child welfare and child care, voting rights, funding and protections for immigrants, the LGBTQIA plus protections, justice and policing reform. We did see some bills that got introduced. Unfortunately, it did not pass, but with the Michigan Coalition to End Mass Incarceration, that's who it is. And they introduced these bills that were pretty common sense, right? Like trying to ban the use of chokeholds from police officers, trying to stop no-knock warrants, things that we have seen the effects of for years now. I mean, social media has really shined a light on how awful this is and police brutality is. So these bills unfortunately did not pass, but I expect them to be reintroduced. And then something that NASW specifically will be working on is a legislator's scorecard. So on our voter voice website, maybe you've seen it and used it to send an email to your legislator for licensure reform or something similar. But we are going to have a webpage on our voter voice that will allow you to look at all of our state legislators, Senate, House, whether they're yours or not, whether they were endorsed by us or not. But we are going to be choosing bills to score. And based on how they vote or sponsor or support or oppose those bills, you'll see how aligned they are with our social work values. So we're really excited to have that resource, to everybody. It's going to be open. It's going to be open to the public. It's not going to be some like super secret resource or anything. So it'll be a really great educational tool for folks, so you can see how our legislators are voting in terms of our social work values. So again, this is our state level list. There is extra opportunity to throw in your input on what's on this list. And I want to remind folks that this is state level, right? So we have federal level and we have state level. So when you think of the state of Michigan, and we had some great conversations already happening in the chat, but what other issues would you like to see on this list? I'm pretty sure I saw someone bring up libraries and the book bans, and there was legislation as well introduced to prohibit the ban of books for district libraries and public libraries. It's escaping me if they passed or not. Again, lame duck was extra lame, so it's hard. I would have to double check on that. So I'm really glad someone brought that up, because you're right. Like the idea of banning books is another really like kind of a scary step, right? It's a scary step in a certain direction that I don't want this country to go in, and I definitely don't want the state of Michigan to go on. Elder abuse legislation, that is another really great one. There's something related to elder abuse that we did support. The bill is going to be reintroduced. It's called Teresa's Law. It's not specific to elders, it is specific to vulnerable adults, which elders can fit under that umbrella as well. What Teresa's Law would do once it's reintroduced is, well, one, something I discovered through my education process with that is that there's no training requirement in the state of Michigan for a caregiver in a facility, a nursing home, to give medication. There's no training or certification for that. So like anybody can like dispense medication in these facilities. So Teresa's Law would, one, require the training for folks dispensing meds in those caregiving facilities, but two, just require like a level of like continuing education credits for those facilities. And if for some reason somebody wasn't complying with that, or maybe it was a unique circumstance that like the family had agreed to, there would be disclosures that would be signed on. So really it's about like transparency and basic accountability. Again, we're social workers, so we have all sorts of, continuing education. That's why we're all here today, right? Or maybe you really did just want to like hear me ramble about politics, of course. I hope that's part of it. But we have so many guidelines and things that we have to keep in mind. And then there's other, folks that are in professions working with people and they don't have the same level of accountability. So um yep, exactly, Susan. There's no licensure requirement for caregiving agencies. So that is something that Teresa's Law would hope to address. So I am looking forward to that being reintroduced. Again, that's another one. My brain tells me that that would be bipartisan support, would go right through, because who doesn't want to, support our vulnerable adults? But again, with the political climate during lame duck, it didn't go that way. Folks, if you're like an audiobook listener or a podcast person, you're somebody that likes to have something on in the background while you're working. I would encourage you to pull up like Michigan Senate TV or Michigan House TV, and you can have that on in the background while you're working, but all the previous videos are also archived. So if you want to kind of see how some of that played out, like going into the end of last year, I would strongly encourage you to do that, because I think it's really important for not only us as social workers, but like really just like the general public, to see like how these folks are interacting with each other. I really need folks and want folks to understand, like, we elect people to serve us, to represent us, and they make like 70,000 a year doing it too. So like, they get money to do this line of work. And it is unfortunate that they sometimes like more or less throw temper tantrums, or they don't show up to work, and they say, if we didn't show up to work because we didn't agree with something, we'd get fired. And it's not like that. So I do encourage folks to like, have it on, like look at what committees you're interested in so you can hear what's being voted on. um and again, I really encourage you, like if you're I don't know, like I'm such a dork and I'm interested in this kind of stuff, but like please like check out some of the end of year stuff. It's really eye-opening for folks who don't do this full time, just to see like what is happening, and like who's showing up to the table for us and who isn't. I'll get off that soapbox for now. I'll probably hop back on it before the end of the hour. And then of course, as social workers, we're interested in a lot of things, right? We work with humans, and there's so many different intersections with humans, as there should be. So collaborating with advocacy groups and experts in these different areas is so important to us. NASW Michigan, we are not the expert in all things. I am most certainly not the expert in all things. So we're really fortunate to have good relationships with the Vera Institute, Nation Outside, Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration, Equality Michigan. I could go on and on, but hopefully you get the idea. Um, Brenda, let me finish my thought, and I'm going to ask that question. This is what happens when I try to answer all the questions in the chat in live time. We work with so many advocacy groups that are the experts in these, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our work with them and those relationships, because as social workers, we do care. We care about all the things, and we want our hands in all the different pots, but we can't be the ones putting up every piece of legislation. So we're excited to support those who can. Brenda, to see how local and state elected officials voted on issues, Ballotpedia is a really great way to like look for specific people. And then you can go to legislature.mi.gov, and that's going to be specific to Michigan. And you can track bills, you can, find ones that, are interested just to, just to you. Maybe you're looking at mental health, maybe you're looking at insurance. You can get pretty specific, and you can even sign up for like email alerts to find out when that bill gets updated. Or if anything, changes, you can get notifications for the committees. So maybe you want to keep an eye on maybe the health policy committee. And then you can get emails sent directly to you when they're going to have a committee hearing, and two, what bills are going to be voted on, because maybe you want to speak in favor of a bill or opposing a bill. Anybody can do that. I can't stress enough that you don't need to be a registered lobbyist to give testimony on a bill or to write a comment card in support or in opposition of a bill. And if anyone's ever interested in doing that, my contact information will be available at the end of this. So please reach out to me. I would love nothing more than for more folks to get involved with this kind of work. And I saw some comments coming up while I was rambling here. Lots of stuff for renewal, the Library Association, banning books failed narrow. Yeah. All right, let's keep it going here. So, okay, the implications for social work. So everything I just talked about and what that means for social work. So legislative gridlock, we already saw this at our state level. I anticipate there's been like hints at it at the federal level. And I anticipate this being like a constant theme when there's these narrow majorities from one party or another. Doesn't matter what party we're talking about. But because of this legislative gridlock, bipartisan is gonna like that is like the key. Everything needs to be bipartisan. It always should be. Again, I can't stress enough, like I don't understand how issues like mental health isn't just a bipartisan issue. It affects everybody. Nobody is immune to it. Full stop. That's the end of the conversation. But we have to make sure we're having these conversations in a way that other people will understand and be able to buy into. I learned from one of my previous supervisors that sometimes when we're having these conversations, and maybe you're like me and you're really passionate about something, and when you hear somebody say something that's not really nice or not really aligned with our values and moral, you want to just go in and say mean things, and it's really hard not to. But I've learned that it's really important to assume positive intent, because there's so many times where people honestly don't know better or they never thought of it that way. So how we can continue having these conversations with people who maybe don't agree with us. And I know that sounds like gross in certain like frameworks and lenses. I understand. I am not ignorant to the fact that there are some not great people who are fighting against the most vulnerable of communities, and having trying to meet people where they're at sounds gross, but we're social workers, and meeting people where they're at is kind of the whole job, and it does apply maybe even extra when we're trying to get things done. So all of that to say, we've seen legislative gridlock happen within the Democratic Party. We've seen it happen within the Republican Party, and then them going kind of against each other. So I fully anticipate it. It's going to continue happening. So how can we, find that middle ground, find that 1 or 2% that we agree on, so we can make some positive change. Competing fiscal priorities. We're already kind of seeing that, right? Someone brought up like, funding the Department of Education. Our social programs going to continue being funded. We don't have a good read on that yet. Obviously, the new administration federally has not, been sworn in yet. So after January 20th, maybe we'll have a better idea of what direction that's really gonna go. And then here at the state, unless something's changed while I've been chatting with everybody here, we don't know committees yet for the Michigan State House. They haven't determined who's sitting on what committee yet. So we don't have like a really good grasp on what that's going to look like. It's all kind of speculation right now. We do know that one side is really supportive of funding social programs, and maybe another side that doesn't feel that way, and we're looking at maybe protecting businesses or small businesses even. Um, Again, not going to get into the weeds there, but we also know that our Governor Whitmer, hasn't really taken a really strong stance on mental health efforts. We've seen like school budgets passed when there's less money for mental health. So like it's on both sides. I'm not going to say one side's better than the other because our Democratic governor is also guilty of not supporting some mental health initiatives. So it's really interesting having these conversations with folks. Saw a couple of things in the chat, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing things. Yes, it is Teresa's law. And I will we can make sure that's put back out. I don't want to exit out of my screen and lose my spot here. But it is Teresa's law and they have to reintroduce it. So what happened was that it got to committee and it died in committee. After I finish this slide, I can do a little recap on why it's so hard to get things done. Because I think it'll startle a lot of people how difficult it really is. But yeah, Teresa's law is and it's like an advocate who started that process. So she's a really great example of like what we can do as social workers. So let me keep this pinned up so I don't forget to bring it back up. And then of course, fragmented policy focus. I think we've already kind of touched on this quite a bit, but what's important to some folks isn't important to others. And it's not even just a party line thing. We see a lot of it on party lines, of course. But it's beyond party lines. We see it within the party as well. We saw that during Lame Duck, we had a representative who said, if you don't vote on this bill, then I'm not showing up to work, and then nobody's getting anything passed because you won't have a majority. And it gets to the point where, like, okay, then I'm gonna call Capitol Police to come pick you up and take you to work. And I wish I was joking and I wish I was exaggerating and being funny. I'm not. This is real stuff that's happening in our state legislature, which is why when I say like, why don't you check out state, the Senate TV or the House TV, or hey, like visit these committees and meetings that I'm going to share in just a moment here, because I think folks need to hear from us as social workers. I did an email blast to all of our state legislators, and I was really surprised at the reception I received, like introducing myself, and my role, and they want to hear from us. So making sure you know who your representative is and who your senator is so you can connect with them. They'll listen to me talk, but they would much rather hear from their constituents. Like tenfold, they'd rather hear from their constituents than from me. So it's like play that card. Say I'm your constituent and I really want to talk to you about mental health funding. That is like something that you have and that you can do, regardless of where you work. I know people get worried about like, well, I work for a nonprofit. I don't want to be a lobbyist. Well, you as a constituent call in to say that you care about mental health funding. That's not lobbying. That is you as a constituent. So if that's another thing folks are ever worried about, like the difference between advocating and lobbying and how to walk that line, it's something I've learned a lot about in my time as working at a nonprofit and then where I'm at today. So please, again, like I'm always happy to chat with any social worker, student, member, you name it, like please reach out to me. Um, all of that to say, before I touch on the Teresa's Law thing and switch slides, social workers, we going into 2025, like I feel like now more than ever is the time for us as social workers to get involved. I think we've always needed to be involved in these conversations, whether you're, sending an email to your legislature, maybe you're stepping up a little bit and you want to get even more involved from there. There's so many ways to participate in these conversations. We had a rally day with Equality Michigan for the pro-trans policy bills that passed at the very last minute. And so many social workers showed up to that and supported our, trans community because we needed to be there to uplift those voices and empower those folks. Um, can you reflect on social work and police coordination at first respond? There's so many good questions in the chat, y'all. Okay, let me wrap up this thought. So social workers, it is our job to advocate. I've said it in so many different scenarios. I'll say it again. Social work is political, whether you want it to be or not. our job is rooted in what is happening politically. Um, I always say that, policy is going to impact practice, right? You've heard that before. I did not invent that. Policy impacts practice. So if you're a clinical social worker who thinks that this has nothing to do with you, you are wrong. It has everything to do with you because it affects your clients, it affects your job. All of this policy is going to affect the practice of social work. However, maybe even bigger than that, maybe even more important than that, is that the people that are doing the work, the community members, that boots on the ground, the individual practitioner, the clients they serve, those are the voices that need to inform the policy. Because when they don't inform policy, that's how bad policy is made. And we see it time and time again that bad policy is created and then we're stuck with it. And then it affects the people that we love and care about the most. So if you're not involved or if you're not convinced that you need to be involved, like you need to be. And I promise that that's not just me being me in this role. It's just a fact of the profession. So before I hop off this slide, I saw a couple of really great things in the chat. So let me scroll up and make sure I don't miss anything. So yes, the Teresa's Law, as it was already mentioned, there's really not a lot, like I guess Michigan is behind about 75% of other states in terms of like accountability, laws, any kind of protections for our vulnerable adults. So that means, our adults with disabilities who need some extra support, and then of course our aging population. So Teresa's Law was actually started by somebody who her mother passed away in a nursing care facility because insulin was administered to her before she ate. Um, because they weren't tracking it and they didn't feed her and they gave her insulin because they knew she needed insulin. But like, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure insulin's like an after the fact kind of thing. And she lost her mom because of it. And there was no like recourse, there was no disclosure that this place didn't have any like certification or training. So, and what I really liked about how Teresa's Law is structured is it's not trying to punish anybody, it's not trying to fine anybody, it's offering training to the people that are in these caregiving jobs. It's just offering training and making sure these things are disclosed to people so people know that when they're, putting their loved ones in these facilities, like they know what they're, what's there. Um, so it's a really great example of somebody who built, she teamed up with a lawyer, and she teamed up with her representative and was able to introduce this law. And I really hope that, going forward, we see some traction with it, but I mean, it's not always that easy. I'm making it sound easy. It's not that easy, but just to show that there's power in those experiences. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to be like a registered lobbyist like I am because of this role. You don't need any of those things. Like you have valuable experiences that need to be shared with our legislators to make change. That said, it's 100%. It's so easy to reach out as a constituent. It sure is. It sure is. You can type in your address and zip code and find out exactly who you need to connect with. And when they see your address is in their district, you're going to get a response even faster than I did. I see, can you reflect on social work and police coordination as first responder issues? We're seeing, like RJ said, we're seeing a lot at like the local level, right? We're seeing social workers in sheriff's offices or with mental health crisis response. We're starting to see we're seeing more and more of those conversations. And I hope we continue to see that. I know like the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice, they're based in Wayne State. They do a lot of research and work with local police departments or maybe county police departments, I should say, doing that kind of work. Like what kind of crisis intervention can we be doing before we're throwing people in handcuffs? I think that's something social workers really need to be in the forefront of. If you're not connected with the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration, again, they like circumference so many different groups that are part of that collaborative. Follow them on Facebook, go on their website. They're a great group. It's like, oops, so sorry. My phone is, when I get a phone call, it pops up on my laptop. So it's super great. They're Nation Outside, Safe and Just Michigan, the Vera Institute, all these people that are doing this groundbreaking work and trying to fund all of these programs and trying to get legislation passed. they love when social workers are supporting them. And we can fill out comment cards, we can write our legislators, we can give expert testimony as to why these things work and why they're important. So please follow these experts that are doing this work and see how we can get involved. I'm really glad that, justice reformed and policing reform is something that so many folks on this call are interested in. It's something I previously worked at Community Housing Network for 5 years, so I was working with folks experiencing homelessness in Oakland County. And the amount of times I, had some run-in issues with, Pontiac police, because that's also where the sheriff's office is. And folks that were clearly having a mental health crisis, thrown into a jail cell, and then we wonder like who is that helping? Like that's not what they needed in that moment by any means at all. And I'm really it's really nice to see that there's such a conversation in the chat right now. Like try not to get emotional about it, but I'm just glad to see so many social workers are talking about these things because and they need to be talked about. And sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into the void about these issues, and it's just really nice to see other folks who care. And it doesn't have to be a controversial issue. Like we're just talking about humans being treated like humans, right? Um, we does not include adult abuse in communities. I might have you elaborate on that, Siham, just so I make sure I understand that question. Jerry said we are starting to have social work internships with local law enforcement at Spring Arbor. I think that's great. Oh, Siham, you came off of mute. Do you want
Yeah, yeah, sure. Hi. The
Hi.
reason I'm asking you that, what about adult, like domestic violence and the elderly? You know what I'm saying? Is that,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Good. Okay. Thank you for the clarifier. Yeah. So Teresa's law specifically is about like caregivers and those type of facilities where caregivers work. So nursing homes, adult foster care facilities, places like that. But that's not to say that what you're mentioning is that's also important. Like I guess there's a difference between like the protections in place with Teresa's law to make sure specifically like medication dispensing, but also like what you're saying is like abuse, like
yeah.
physical, emotional, and that is something that probably needs, I mean, when I say probably, definitely needs to be addressed because all of these things need to be addressed. So that's a really good point. I'm going to add that to my list of priorities because you're not alone in that thought. So thank you. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Donna.
Yeah. No, I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm so happy there's like so much input from folks. It makes my job easier today. So I'm glad to see some people are getting some like school internships with local law enforcement. Again, I think like social workers have a place in these conversations. For people who don't know what to say to legislators, I recommend Substack, Chopboard Carry Water. It takes the guesswork out of it. Thank you, Kirsten. The resources are always welcome. And right, I feel like when I say, ooh, talk to your legislators, you're like, ooh, like that's scary. It's not scary. I mean, like definitely have some talking points and be prepared, right? But they are literally just people. Right? Like, someone downriver, I just found out I'm meeting with her in the next couple of weeks. She's 22 years old and just became a Michigan State representative. Like, at 33 years old, I assume they're all older than me. That is not the case at all. And she's 22 and she just became state rep, and that's amazing. But like they're people, and well, one, if you're their constituent, they want to hear from you. If you're their constituent, I don't know, they're not always going to have a solution and they're not always going to agree with you, but they want to hear from you. And then on the flip side of that, like as social workers, we are an expert in something for them, right? That is something most want your vote. You're so right about that. So much all the more reason that's something we have though, right? They need us to vote, and that is why we go and talk to them, and it's not always going to work out the way we want it to, but that is like the most powerful thing that we can do. And as social workers, we do offer an expert lens, whether you're in substance use and harm reduction, whether it's mental health, whether it's housing, it's so on and so forth, right? Like we all bring an expert lens, not only as a constituent in their district, but as a social worker, and that's really powerful. Kenneth brought up going to a community constituent coffee hour. That like almost all of them have coffee hours somewhere in the district. Some of them do virtual ones, so you can just like hop right on Facebook and do it. Go meet with your legislators, like go hang out with them and let them know what's going on in your community or the clients that you serve. I met with Senator Santana this morning. She represents the Dearborn area, and they mentioned that what's important to them right now is, well, one, making sure Medicaid is being utilized to its maximum potential, but also homelessness and substance use and juvenile justice, because it's something that Senator Santana has a personal history with. Um, it's just, and she's also involved with regulatory affairs. I'm like, oh, you mentioned regulatory affairs. I got some licensing things to talk with you about. But just have conversations with people. Like, they're humans, and we bring a lot of power as social workers. See, we have about 10 minutes left here. So how can you get involved other than writing your legislator? Um, and what that looks like. We have our Legislative and Social Policy Committee. If you are a member of NASW Michigan, you can join anytime. If you're not a member of NASW Michigan, you can still sit on these meetings. We meet the third Friday of every month. So that's this Friday, and we will be talking about our legislative priorities and getting those official with that stamp of approval so we can start really, hitting the ground running. Maybe you're like, Dana, like legislation's cool and all, but like I don't know. I'm sick of like listening to you talk, Dana, or whatever the reason might be. We have so many other work groups that you can join. We have one for aging and gerontology. We have an LGBTQ plus issues one. We have so many more than that, and those are the two that come to mind. Maybe you want to get a little involved into like the political side of things. We have our MPACE committee that you can sit in on. Those are like an appointed spot. All that to say, visit our events page. We have so many committees. There's so many ways to get involved, and maybe there's something that you're really committed to, and we probably have a group for it. We also have our Legislative Action Center. So I mentioned that before. If you visit that webpage today, you'll see that it's kind of bare bones right now, and it's just because we don't have any legislation up right now. They just started, and the bills that are up are, I could spend some time talking about that, but it's we don't have any bills that we're like super supporting right now. We are waiting to see how it plays out, and we also don't know committees yet. And then of course, connect with us on social media. If you see a lot of stuff about voting and legislation, I promise you that's me blowing up our feed with all that stuff. But we have Facebook, we have Instagram. Follow us on socials. That's a great way to get updated. I also saw some more things in the chat, so. As you're involved in your community, they know you're a local influence. As a former county commissioner, my state rep knows that I have community influence as well and will listen to me. Absolutely. If they see you're somebody that's involved and showing up, like there is so much power to that. Brenda brought up motels being turned into homes. I've seen that like in a housing perspective. I've also seen like from my previous time with housing, I've seen like long-time renters get kicked out of their homes so they could turn it into an Airbnb so it would make more money. Housing is something that if anyone ever wants to talk housing, like you can call me, email me at any time. You'll probably regret doing it, but like I'd love to talk about housing with more social workers because I feel like that's something that needs to be added at the federal level and the state level for our priorities because homelessness increased exponentially across the country this year. So I won't get into it, but like if you want to talk housing policy, I'm your girl. Contact me at any time. And then we also have some upcoming events, right? So we were going to do our first ever campaign school. So maybe you're like, ooh, some of this kind of sounds cool. Maybe
No.
I do want to run for office, or maybe I just want to learn more about what that would look like. It's gonna be 2 days, two different Saturdays. Well, as a 2-day series, I should say, on 2 Saturdays. So the first Saturday is virtual. The second Saturday is gonna be in person at University of Michigan. Hope to see you there. If you're a student, make sure you reach out to your school about potential registration options. And then our Capital Action Day, that is, we're opening the doors to other mental health professionals as well. But if you want to meet with some legislators and see what it's like at a day at the Capitol, join us. And again, if you're a student, please contact your school first because they might be helping out with some registration. Um, and then any questions? It's been really, really great seeing so many things in the chat, and it's been like I love when like the chat's super engaged, people coming off of mute to contribute to the conversation. Um, so are there any specific questions I can talk about some of like specific bills just to give you guys an idea as to what's happening already so early on. I'm glad it's been good information for people. Just so folks are keeping an eye on it, what we're kind of seeing and what you can expect to see in these early days. And I should have brought it up forever ago, but y'all were saying such good stuff. So let me wrap up here just to give y'all a preview of what to expect with our state legislature. We are seeing like competing bills being introduced. So we're seeing like the Democratic majority Senate introduce bills that directly oppose like House bills that are being introduced by the Republicans. So we're seeing that already happening. We've also already seen a bathroom bill introduced with the Republicans in the House, so already like targeting our trans community. They wasted no time. Is there an alternative participation pathway for folks who may be out of the state on legislative action day? That's a really good question, Katie. I don't think we have, just because it's like a lot of meeting face to face and whatnot, but I think it might be kind of cool to explore like something similar on a virtual platform. So I'm going to note that and see what that might look like. Oh yes, let me switch sides so you have my contact information. There's my email. Glad someone brought that up. Um, so my email's there. I'm super responsive to an email, almost to a fault. I am a social worker who struggles with boundaries. Um, Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that. Amy, for the Interstate Compact, I'll do a brief little overview of it. They meet like once every 6 months, so the compact isn't official yet. They are still doing the work to make it real. Quite a few states have signed on to it. They're having these early discussions. So where the Interstate Compact stands is the states that have signed on to it, they have delegates. They're determining the rules for what that looks like. As of right now, where it stands, the compact is going to require the ASWP exam, which is troubling because a lot of the states that signed on to the compact have done alternative pathways to address licensing issues and barriers. We've also learned recently that our executive branch here in Michigan, Governor Whitmer, she's not really like keen on interstate compact issues, particularly as it relates to, thank you, Katie, for throwing that link in there. Those meetings are open to the public, so if you want to sit on a very long meeting, but kind of just hear what's going on with the compact, you are welcome to listen in. You can do public comment, but they're not gonna like address it by any means because we're not delegates yet. All that to say, the ASWB is very heavily involved with the Interstate Compact and has some money behind it. So it is like kind of concerning, like it on a very personal, like my personal speculation is that it feels like an attempt to like nationally codify the ASWB exam. So I'm a little hesitant about it, but I also recognize our licensed social workers who want to practice over state lines, like why it's important. So like both are true. So it'll definitely be an ongoing discussion. But like I mentioned before, Governor Whitmer is not too keen on interstate compacts due to like the liability issue, especially like a state like Michigan, where maybe we're a bit more progressive in our laws than maybe another state, maybe like Florida, for example, right? So like what would that mean for social work practice? Um, any other questions? Almost got us right to 1 o'clock. I'm so appreciative of everybody who had questions, added anything in the chat. And for 90 plus people listening to me ramble today, I hope you learned something new, or maybe, I don't know, maybe a little bit of my energy rubbed off on you and you want to write a letter to your legislator. Um, I don't know if, Danielle, if you have any last minute as we wrap up things, I can stop sharing my screen so people can see your lovely face.
Thank you, Dana. That was fantastic. I learned a lot. And I'm sure everyone else did too. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
I will send everyone a post-event email here in a few minutes that'll include a link to the evaluation. And remember, your CE certificate will automatically download when you complete that evaluation. If you have any questions about that, please do not hesitate to reach out. I know Dana previewed several of our advocacy related events on the calendar, so please be sure to continuously check our events calendar. We have a lot going on. There's additional free CE trainings this week. So please take a look, and if there is a topic that you're hoping to see that you don't see on the calendar, please send me a note and let me know what additional needs you may have. Dana, folks are asking if they can get a copy of the slides.
Absolutely. If you're interested in the slides, just email me. I'll send them right over to you.
Perfect. And I can include Dana's email in my post-event note as well, so it's handy for everyone. And with that, we will wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay warm. We'll see you next time.